Hi, class. Well, we're into the second week now, and this week we're going to be talking about, as you can see on the page, white trash. It is a research paper, and it is not to denigrate white people now, but to explain uh, about the history of this country as we have not been taught. The amazing thing about history in our country is you get the same thing in fourth grade as sixth grade as high school and in college, unless you do as I have and other people have done. You split off. Sorry about the traffic, I'm sitting outside. You split off into study Latin American history, black history, labor history, women's history. It goes on, but those are specialties. So our labor history knowledge, or our history of America knowledge, is basic and pretty much untrue. So that's what we're going to be looking at this week. And this isn't really important to me and hopefully to you as we knock down these myths, especially in this time when we have so much going on, particularly with Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, all people of color matter, and the police brutality or the police gangs that are creating such disturbance in our country. It's really important that we know from whence we really came and what is the real purpose, or was the real purpose, of the founding people, if you can say founding, given that the country was already founded by all the native people, but the Europeans that came to this country, what they were looking for in making this country theirs after they fought with each other, but basically in making this country theirs. So taking from White Trash, if you get the novel, it's not a novel, excuse me, if you get the book, it's mind-blowing. A lot of these things I knew, but not in the depth that she goes into. So I'm going to read from some of the things here, and then I'm going to add my point of view. I will upload this onto the page underneath my lectures so that you can read it if for some reason I go too fast or I don't enunciate properly, so that you can get the full impact of this. So the book starts out, colonies ought to be immunicatories or sinks, like in kitchen sinks, bathroom sinks, of states to drain away the filth. That was in 1630, said by John White, and it was a plea to go to America and start plantations. So what are immunicatories? And I hope I'm saying it right. What immunicatory does is it carries the waste out from the body. It excretes. Basically, it's defecation. So what they're talking about is the colony should be the place where Europeans can send the folks that they think need to be excreted from their land and sent down the sinks. Let that sink in. It wasn't necessarily the pioneering spirit. Okay, so here we go. As the European countries became interested in America, English and French particularly, they assigned the land as empty and without recognized owners. It was this wide open space where more tribes than we know of lived here, but they called it an empty space that was waiting to be occupied. So hopefully we'll get into some of that throughout the class too. The first thought was to harness these natives, or savages as they were sometimes called, who lived off the earth and moved around like nomads. They wanted to gain all the riches in the new land and profit from them. And they thought that they could send industrious men to cultivate its riches with a firm hand. So to take control of these native people, make them work for them. Land use played a very key role in the future categories of race and class. Folks, before any society was established, the colonies labeled some folks as entrepreneurs, and they were then the stewards of the exploitable land and the majority of the occupiers. Now, these people were not, we're talking about when they first came to this country. These people were not the shoemakers and the like. These people were sent over by the government or by whoever the government assigned the land to. That person did not go. So say I, Gosha Maffei, was told by the King of England that I could have X amount of land in Virginia. And then I hired someone to go in my stead to go there and then make sure that the land was taken care of so that you could send me back gold, silver, tobacco, whatever became the case. So this was really important. So how did they do that? Because people were didn't know this was going on. So they went looking for people with nothing to gain. So pretty much they went looking for the waste people. And the waste people are considered people who have no land, have no job, have no property. Well, that's redundant. And they were collected. They were the paupers, the vagabonds, the convicts, and the debtors, the unemployed men and young boys wandering the streets, say, of London. It was envisioned that these idle and unused workers would become the developers of the new world, and America would be the solution to poverty. America was to become the one giant workhouse. See, we can't do that anymore. All the lands have been discovered. But the idea was send the refuse out of Europe and let them build for us a world that we can profit by. So as you go through the semester, I want you to think about this as we look at what is a worker, and how did we get to this point where there's so much angst amongst working people. So among the very first wave of workers were convicts. They were debt slaves, or they were supposed to repay their ownings, both if they owed money or if they were in jail, to just work and work and work, and then work till they died, basically, to pay off either being in debt or having been convicted. So the poor who could not find employment were swept up. They were considered debtors. They were leeching off the working people of England. So they picked them up and they did that. So they couldn't send them without supervision. So that's where they came with a similar thing as they used in Ireland, kind of a militarization. The workers would be used to build forts that eventually were used to protect them from the people who originally were here. So they would build forts, and they were to dig trenches and to produce gunpowder. So we came as military. Not we, because everyone in the class didn't come there, but the original founders. I'm probably more Irish than anything else, so I'm sure I came along, but not till the 1700s. Some of them were ex-soldiers and ex-sailors, so they came and they were going to be utilized. And there was a complete flop, and if you read the book, you will see how the flop happened. It's quite amazing. There was a complete flop of the first English settlement because they brought these people and they said, why should we work? And so they either died or they fought or they stole, but they weren't inspired to build America for people back in Europe. And then, of course, they built prisons and they hung people and they asked for more. So it was redundant, and it kept on happening until tobacco came into as a product, and then the tobacco, it was kind of like a saving grace, except eventually they used up the land by replanting and replanting, but they needed more workers. And this again skewed the system, because then they needed more supervisors, and then they needed more indentured servants, and so the story of indentured servants will be discussed in the next week. But so America began its foundation on appropriating land from native people, sometimes using them as slaves, and bringing the dregs of the British society to work without pay as indentured servants or convicts. So from the beginning of America's founding, the class system existed, and it has prospered ever since. And that's what this book, White Trash, is about, understanding how it prospered. There's great chapters on the difference between Georgia and the Carolinas, and why at first slavery wasn't allowed in Georgia. So it's a really provocative book that I recommend you have just for your own understanding, if this intrigues you. And that's that for the lecture for this week, and everything else is on the page. So see you next week, hopefully.